Whoa! Oh, it's nice to get out, isn't it? I'm Philippa Perry. This is Bernardine Evaristo. Welcome to a Guardian live event. This is the first event that's mixed live and online. Hi guys, the online guys. Hello, hello. There's over 100 of you in the hall, but there's over 1,000 of you online. Later on, we'll be taking your questions in the hall. But if you are online, you can just press the question button and send a question to Bernardine whenever you like. Right, I think that's the end of my housekeeping. I think so. Okay. I'm Philippa Perry. I'm an observer columnist and a psychotherapist and a writer, but never mind about that because we're here tonight to talk to Professor Bernardine Evaristo, winner of the 2019 Turner Prize. She's so talented, you didn't know that, did you? Man Booker Prize. And Bernardine got this prize when she was 60. And you might think, oh, late bloomer. No, not a late bloomer. Bloomed pretty early on, actually, and carried on blooming. The rest of us, however, needed to be educated to realise that Bernardine was a worthy winner. And you did quite a lot of work in getting the world ready for you, as well as doing your own work, didn't you?
Do you talk about the personal development?
No, I'm actually talking about when you... She did personal development work. No, I'm actually talking about when you came across the gatekeepers who said things like, nobody's interested in black literature or stories of the black British. And you had to keep knocking, you had to keep pushing against, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to remember, like 40 years ago, what the culture was like in this country for black writers, because we weren't really on the radar then.
Yeah.
Writers of colour weren't really, there were just one or two exceptions. And the industry, I would say the industry hasn't really been interested in our voices en masse until about 2 years ago.
And you were quite instrumental in getting people interested.
I used to do, I mean, I've been an activist for a while. I used to call myself an advocate, but then the word activist sort of gained currency, so I say activist, in setting up inclusion projects for writers of colour. I've been doing that now for, about 15, 16 years. It's just one of the things that I've been doing to try to change the society we're living in.
And you have changed it.
Well, it is changing. I think society's more open.
Yeah.
Other people have also had initiatives to kind of get the gatekeepers to open the doors to us and so on. And I think we're at a place where there's a lot more interest in our work. And let's see if that is sustained over the next few decades.
I think what helps is that in order to break through, you don't have to be as good, you have to be so much better for people to notice you. So the quality of work we're getting from you and some of your contemporaries is fantastic. It's mind-blowing. When I first read Mr. Loverman, which was the first work of yours I read, I was absolutely gobsmacked. Who's read Mr. Loverman? Oh, well, a lot of you have got some more homework to do. Okay, thank you for the ones that have read it. I was thinking, I don't understand why this writer isn't better known. I couldn't understand it. But after reading the Manifesto, I understand it better. This is what we're here to talk about this evening. The Manifesto... I like calling it the Evaristo Manifesto because it's a bit of a rhyme there. This is a book about you. It's your first non-fiction, and it's half biography and half how-to book, I believe. It is a manifesto. And one of the things that you manifest is, I'm going to quote now, "The ancestors are swaying silently behind us." And I'm just going to sway a few ancestors now. So, what's it like when you see your aunts?
Yeah, who I never got to meet. I don't know what happened to them. They're my father's older half-sisters. For me, it's a lost history. And I'm very, very interested in history. It's there in my work. It's there just in my interest generally. And I know very little about my father's background. And I know very little about his parents or his wider family back in Nigeria. And so these photos have a huge amount of significance for me because, especially with the internet, photos are they're just enlarged, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they almost feel as if they're in the room. And I feel their presence in my life, especially my grandmother, Zenobia, who I didn't meet. She died in 1967. And that was the only photograph I had of her for a very long time, for many, many decades. And I kind of mythologized her because I just think it's a beautiful picture. She looks beautiful. She's very serene. She feels very at peace. She doesn't feel particularly posed or anything. She just feels like she's somebody who's very, very centered. And then I discovered another photograph of her, which was taken at the end of her life, so around 1967. And her face was just ravaged and, sunken cheekbones. Yeah. And you could see her teeth hadn't been well looked after. And she just looked traumatized. And it was just, I was like, oh my God, this is the image I've had of my grandmother as a young woman who might have been about 20 or so, all my life. And then I saw the reality of her later life. And whatever happened to her in between, she lost her children. She lost my father to England. She lost his twin sister, who died in childbirth before my father came to England. She lost her husband, who died in Cameroon before my father and his twin sister were born. She was a petty trader. She was illiterate, although he did leave her property, so she was a woman of property, actually. And that difference between the young woman and the older woman, in a way, it's kind of symbolic of how I like to create my characters. You're talking about Mr. Loverman. This is a man who's 74, but you also get a really strong sense of what he was like as a young man.
Yes.
And then how he has reached this point.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I do with my books. I like to dig into the psychology of my characters to work out what kind of lives they've had to reach the point at which they're in my book as protagonists.
I don't think anyone does it better. There is your grandfather.
And that's him, grandfather, yeah. Who we all love this photograph because my father was a little man. His children generally are very tall.
Yeah.
So I'm 5'9", my brothers are 6 foot. My father was probably about 5'4", 5'3", but he was very strong. He had a tiny waist right through until his 70s. He used to be a boxer. And I think he was a small man. You can sort of tell by where he's sitting in the chair. But his image is so powerful, isn't it? His expression.
He obviously cares a lot about his image. He's dressed with care.
Yeah.
He's very dapper.
He absolutely is. And my father was a formidable man in many ways in the household. And he looks formidable, even though my father never knew him. So he's another sort of lost strand of the history.
Yeah. You've lost a lot. I mean, in terms of you lost your aunts, you didn't have this grandfather, and maybe...
I had one half-brother. Yeah. My father had a half-brother, but I never met him.
You never met him?
Yeah, he was a generation older than him.
I'm just going to keep clicking.
Yeah.
Now, look at that lady, and then look at Bernardine.
Do we look alike, do you think?
I think you're spitting.
Do you think so?
Do you not see it? Do you see it, boys and girls? Yeah.
She was actually 4'11", my grandmother.
Well, it's not the height but your mouth and the shape of your face. I couldn't tell you apart.
Wow. So she was born in 1905, maybe, and there we go, 1905.
Yeah.
1905, and she died in 1986. And her mother was Irish, and her mother came from Ireland.
Yeah.
But her grandmother was Irish, and her mother was half Irish. But I actually think she looks kind of Hispanic, don't you think? And my mother had olive skin, has slightly olive skin, and I just think there's something there in her roots, because, I don't know, anyway, it's one of the games I play about trying to detect things in people. But she was very powerful individual in the domestic sphere.
And what I find interesting about all these photographs is that people think of you as a black writer, but you're half white.
Yeah.
What happened to your white heritage? I mean, you write about it really brilliantly.
I do.
And you own it.
Yes.
But it's not so much part of your identity as your black heritage.
But that's the ridiculousness of this false construct called race, isn't it?
Yes.
Because we're all biologically essentially the same. But I have darker skin, so that then puts me into the brown or the black camp. And so if I were to claim a white identity, how's that going to work, Am I going to have a label saying I am white, therefore treat me as a white person? People, as I say in the book, people see my father through me. They don't really see my mother.
Look at Granny, though. She's the spit of you.
Yeah, but people see skin colour. That's what they see, and hair texture, and features, and so therefore I am biracial, obviously, but I'm also in the black camp.
Well, you're definitely in the black camp.
And I own the black camp.
You own the black camp.
As such.
But it blew me away when I read this, how much white camp you're in as well.
Yeah.
And, are you allowed to own it?
Well, I do.
Yeah.
That is my identity.
Yeah, you do.
In this racialised world, my identity is white and black together, mixed. Yeah. But I am politically aligned to Africa and the African diaspora. But my work is always in some way not so much with Go Woman Other, but there's always some kind of racial mixing going on with my work. But I, as a writer, I'm not particularly interested in writing white stories.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of people doing that.
Yeah.
Why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
My interest is the huge multiplicity of the African diaspora, and what I can explore through that.
Next picture. Mum and Dad.
Yeah. Can you see me and my mother?
Not so much.
Oh.
You skipped a generation. I can see you. The shape of your face again, but it seems more pronounced with your.
Don't you think I look like my father though?
No, not really.
He had a big jaw.
I think you've got Granny's jaw. Yes. Her relations weren't very welcoming to your dad, were they?
Yeah, they tried to stop the marriage, and and I explored it in my book Lara, and I understand it.
Who's read Lara? Hands up. Good. Again, a lot of you have got a lot of work to do. It's such a fantastic book. It's a poem, and it's poem and prose all in one. Is it iambic?
No. It's kind of free verse as much as anything. Yeah.
I was counting the syllables for ages.
It's also syllabic as well. It's partly syllabic, but it's a novel. I call it a novel in verse.
It's fabulous, and you read it, and you read the first bit, and you think, "Oh, I'm reading in verse," and then you forget you're reading in verse, and you're just
reading the story.
Yeah.
And the sort of form melts away,
The form melts away, but the poetry gets under your skin and you feel good. So read it. So I think it's really good. Okay, now, look at old Chubby Chops at the top there. That's our author, everybody.
Yeah.
And I particularly like your scheming face. This is our heroine here. Are you enjoying all this? I am. It's good, isn't it? And then I'm skipping past this one.
I remember these clothes, you know.
Have you still got them?
No.
Good.
No, that was a suede patchwork skirt.
Oh, very much of its time.
Really? And they were, what do you call it, fishnets. They were white fishnet stockings.
Well, you were a one, weren't you?
And I still wear trainers like that today.
You are quite a natty dresser, and you've always been a natty dresser, as we can see from that, except for
the tracksuit era. Oh, that
Holy Communion. Yeah, I'm quite interested in the Catholic influence. Now, this is my favourite. Here is our heroine. Here, there's no cats in the audience tonight because this laser will drive them mad, won't it? But here is our heroine, and I was so taken in the book, this book, which you've all got to read. I was so taken in it about how important acting is to how you develop character. And when you learn to act, it's a bit like learning to draw with your body, isn't it? It's sort of learning to depict something, you know, accurately. It must have helped you become a writer.
Absolutely. Just to comment on this picture, just before I go into that, I never realised that I forgot that I got really good parts at the youth theatre. And it was only when this photo resurfaced, that I realised there was the evidence that I actually was well cast. And it just shows you how fickle memory is, or at least my memory is, because I had no recollection of it. I would have thought I just kind of melted into the background at the youth theatre. But I clearly did not. And then my friend said, yeah, of course you did. You always got good parts. I don't remember it. But anyway.
Maybe you were a star, but you were a star because you were interested in the part, interested in the work, and not interested in being the star.
I wasn't interested in being the star, that's right, actually. Yeah, I wasn't interested in that. So because I started, so I had this theatre background, the youth theatre from the age of 12, and then I started writing at drama school one-woman shows that I then performed. And I think that really was a huge kind of influence on how I wrote, which was about, as an actor, inhabiting my characters, as you would an actor.
Yeah.
The characters I'd written myself. And that's what I've continued to do as a writer of fiction. I try to inhabit my characters as if I am inside them and living their experience.
When you're sketching a character, do you practice how she'd speak? Do you still use acting now as a sort of workshopping way of getting the...
I read the work aloud when it's been written.
Yeah.
But not before it's been written. But the way the character speaks emerges through the act of writing. And then I read it aloud and hear it. So you mentioned Mr. Loverman, Barrington.
Yeah.
So I wrote his way of speaking, because it's written, you know, a lot of it's written in first person.
Yeah.
I wrote it down and then I read it aloud to myself to see how authentic it sounded.
Yeah.
And also because his voice kind of captured me.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed speaking with his accent, really, his Antiguan accent.
I couldn't believe, reading that it was actually written by a woman. Because you are so good at this acting, at this getting under the skin of characters that aren't you. I mean, some authors write the same characters again and again and again, but you never do. You invent new characters, and I feel like I'm meeting different people all the time when I'm reading your work.
That's interesting. I mean, you say with Barrington, you know, 74 Caribbean-year-old gay man, I'm none of those things, right?
Yeah.
But I have
Not
known
news.
Caribbean... Sorry?
I said not used.
I have known Caribbean people
Yeah.
all my adult life. And I have a very good friend who's from Antigua. And I have known some older Caribbean men. And that is, you know, you don't need to... I don't need to know older Caribbean men in depth to write that character.
Yeah.
I didn't need to know them. You just have the seed of things swirling around in your imagination, and then it kind of comes out through the act of writing. It's quite interesting. And it's good that you feel that these characters are all distinct, because that is one of the things I aim to do, you know, for never to repeat myself.
Yeah.
So that each character comes alive in each book, in all the books. The multiple characters are all distinct from each other. And maybe that is the acting. You're playing a different part every time.
I just think it should be part of every creative writing course that people should get into acting, because I can really see how it's informed your work, because the characters are inhabitable.
Yeah, and they're quite performative. So I tend to think of, my characters are slightly larger than life. They're not flat on the page. No. And when they are flat on the page, they don't work for me.
I think that's because when I went to creative writing classes once, and I was told, show, don't tell. So you don't say, Bernardine is a lively woman. You write her as a lively woman.
Yes.
So people make their own minds up about it. And you are the queen of that. It's brilliant.
Oh, thank you. But I teach at Brunel University, and I'm teaching a monologues module at the moment. And half of it is the students performing their own monologues.
Yeah.
Because I thought it'd be really interesting to get these students who are coming to do a master's in creative writing and fiction, for them to go through the process I went through all those years ago.
Yes.
Where you write your monologue and then you perform, and that deepens your connection to the text. And so it's a bit of an experiment, but it's definitely working, I think.
I think it's such a good idea. Let's see how she's progressing, shall we? Hello.
I made all those clothes myself.
Oh, wow. What, the jeans?
No, not the skirt.
Oh, that's a skirt.
It's a skirt, yeah.
You're with the white girls here.
Yeah, actually, one of them isn't so white, which I didn't realise when we were at school.
Really?
Yeah, she's half Japanese.
Oh, wow. There was mostly, if I've read this right, there was mostly white girls at your school, and you were one of the girls. And then when you went from Woolwich into that big London, what was it like to find a black community?
Yeah, it was wonderful, because it was the Woolwich of my childhood was not a diverse place at all. Now it is, but it wasn't then. And so to hang around with other black women at drama school, which is where I first started to make black female friends, and then to be part of a community of women of colour and white women as well in the 1980s was where I found a home there. And it was really important for me, actually, to spend my 80s basically in a kind of, not quite separatist, but, kind of not really engaging with men very much at all.
Yeah.
And focusing on being a woman, but also creating with theatre that I was doing at the time, and being surrounded by other women of colour, and not having to justify ourselves, just finding our way creatively amongst each other, and that was really important for me. I wasn't because I was an actor at the time. I wasn't an actor going out there into the so-called mainstream theatre and being cast in parts that I wouldn't necessarily want to play, and having to deal with a kind of majority white male at that time theatre establishment. I didn't have to deal with it at all. I was there, part of my little community, hanging around, this area, going to because I was lesbian, going to the lesbian clubs in this area, like the Bell, which used to be not far from here, and the Rackets up the road and the Angel up the road. I used to live in Islington for a very long time, and just finding myself that way. And that was really important for me as a creator, as an activist, as a woman, for my identity.
I can't imagine that transition from the Woolwich next to the convent house of 8 children to that big London and a new community.
Yeah.
It's like a new family.
Absolutely. It was a new family. I mean, we fought, obviously.
Yeah.
And because that's what we did then. There was a lot of internecine fighting going on. But we were like an extended family supporting each other.
And when we are who we are in relationship with others, so you're formed in relationship with your mum and dad and your siblings and then your school friends, and then it must have been such a big formative step to form with, oh, look at her, she's really forming, to form with other black people that weren't your family?
Yeah. It was see, the thing that bonded us together, in my case in particular, because my upbringing had been very white. I hadn't grown up inside Nigerian traditions, for example.
Yeah.
My father didn't teach us anything.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't grow up in a Caribbean family.
Yeah.
And I didn't have, for example, Caribbean parents or a Caribbean mother. So my upbringing was very, very white. And then I was learning how, kind of mixing with people in Britain, black British experience, which we were bonded through the fact that we were treated as outsiders, especially in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, we were, vilified, we were unimportant, we were mostly invisible in the culture, and yet we saw each other.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
That must have been absolutely huge. I grew up in Warrington, and I'd watch the news on the telly, and Warrington was never mentioned. And
where is it?
Yes.
It's up north.
Yeah, up north. Don't worry about it. You know, it's between Manchester and Liverpool. Warrington was never mentioned, which in a very silly way made me feel like I didn't exist. Because where was my city? I mean, I had a lot going for me. I was white, I was middle class, but I felt like, oh, we're not important, we don't exist. So if you have no black culture reflected back to you in the mainstream culture, very few books, very few black newsreaders at that time. We're much better now, we've got Clive, but at the time there wasn't, Moira hadn't started work yet. There wasn't that, and there was, I can remember thinking it was such a big thing when Naomi Campbell became a supermodel. That wasn't till much later on.
90s, yeah.
So you had no mirroring back from the larger culture of who you were. So when you tell me we validated each other, we showed that each other existed, I think that must have been more powerful than I can imagine.
Absolutely. And also as a writer, I rejected conventional theatre because I wasn't invested in it, because I realised it wasn't my tradition, that I wasn't seen to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I then created, with my colleagues, the kinds of theatre that was about who we were in this society. So we found the form to fit the content of what we wanted to say. So we were exploring and experimenting. And then as a writer, that's also what I've continued to do. To find the form that fits what I have to say, because I've always had this feeling that I'm not really part, well, I'm not, because I'm seen as an outsider, I'm not really part of the general body of literature. I know everything's changed in the last couple of years, but, I've always been seen as somebody on the periphery. People of colour have generally, with exceptions, because there are always exceptions, been seen as people on the periphery. But that then means that I have to find my own way through, which means that I have my own voice as a writer. I have my own way of doing things.
You say in the book that you aren't influenced so much by the great English literature classics, so much as push against them.
Yeah, push against them. But that's a good thing. I think it's been a good thing for me, because, when a lot of writers will say that, they love Jane Austen, love George Eliot, they will love Virginia Woolf. These are the writers that inspired them. And perhaps they try and emulate those writers. Well, I never did.
Yeah.
And the writers who inspired me were the African-American writers, but that most of them weren't really writing about us. They were writing about their culture.
Yeah.
But at least they were people of colour that they were writing about.
Yeah.
So I was feeling a bit seen by them, even though obviously there's a huge difference between America and Britain.
Yeah. Yes, it's very interesting how you made a new form. You made a new theatre company, because there wasn't a theatre company that was right for you, so you made one.
Yeah, Theatre of Black Women.
That is a massive thing to do.
Well, that's what people were doing. They were doing that. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, You know, there were gay theatres, Gay Sweatshop, for example. The Women's Theatre Group, which then became Sphinx. There were lots of black and Asian theatre companies. There were socialist theatre companies, grey eye theatre, disabled theatre companies. So they were all doing the same thing. They were saying, we are invisible in the theatre of this country, so we are going to create theatre that speaks about our lives. And we were part of that.
And it helped, didn't it?
Yeah. And it did. It made a difference.
It made a difference.
Yeah, for sure, and it was important. And now the sort of more mainstream theatre is a lot more inclusive than it was 40 years ago.
Yeah. Next picture. She's great. She's going to be saying, I was always saying I was going to be famous, which I'd forgotten about, of course. Yeah. Be careful what you wish for. Wow. Drama school graduate. Isn't it funny? What would you like to tell her now, that drama school graduate, if you were going to talk to her now?
Stop drinking so much and smoking, for a start.
You just sound like your mother.
I would just say to her to just enjoy life, go through it. Don't worry about the future. Don't feel that you have to, tick all these kind of rites of passage markers as you go through life. Live the life you want to live, and it will be rewarding in itself. And don't worry about perhaps not being enough of this or enough of that. So I would just say, just carry on doing what you're doing.
Yeah. You did good, kid. But she was worried about it.
And the dungarees were great.
The dungarees are great, but she does look a little bit worried. Possibly about whether she looks good enough. She looks great. She doesn't need to worry. Here's X. Your ex.
We're still good friends, actually.
Your first big relationship.
Yes, with a woman. Yes, I'd had guys before then. Yeah, it's weird seeing that blown up, actually.
I mean, go on.
So that was at the Melkweg. Is it called the Melkweg? Anyway, it's a venue in Amsterdam, which I think is still there. And I was there with Theatre for Black Women performing a play as part of a women's festival. Yeah. And I think practically everyone at the festival, they're all dykes, I think. And there was a big party at the end of it. And X came up to me and said something in my ear, and we got together. And we were together for about 2.5 years, and it was a really lovely relationship, long-distance relationship. I don't think I've ever talked about this in public. Between us, and she is about 10 years older than me. Doesn't really look it there, does she?
No.
But and I loved Amsterdam as a city, especially Amsterdam in the 80s compared to London in the 80s. Very different cities. Amsterdam was a European city, beautiful architecture, outside cafes, very stylish people, the canals, the bicycles. I just loved all of that, the interior design. I loved it. And it wasn't, Habitat was probably taking off here.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it had gone beyond certain districts. IKEA was probably couple of decades away.
Yeah.
So we were still floral, and linoleum and kind of velvet sofas and the rest of it. And so Amsterdam, for me, was very exotic and a lovely city to be in, and I was in love. And, I used to sit on the back of her bike. She used to have one of these big Dutch bikes, and I would sit on the back, and then we'd go clubbing, and then she'd cycle back in the middle of the night to her squat, which was like a luxury apartment.
Yeah.
They really do squats well. But they did. They were like official squats.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Those tall, I don't know what you call them, equivalent of kind of townhouses, I guess.
So she was a nurturing relationship.
She was. I know where you're going now. It was very nurturing, and she was also very emotionally literate.
Yeah.
I wasn't, because I had learnt to suppress my emotions, and people always used to say about me that I was calm, cool, and collected, and I used to think, but that's not how I feel. I really didn't feel that, but that was how I projected myself clearly. And so, but she was somebody who would want to talk about her feelings. And I wasn't used to that because she was a woman as well. And I had had some relationships with women, but they weren't, she was just very different. She was more sophisticated in how she explored herself and herself in relationships. We used to write a lot. So there was a lot also expressed in letters, which I've still got. And of course, the guys I'd had before had been completely emotionally illiterate. And they were young men. They were 18, 19, 26.
They have their advantages, though.
But this was somebody who I learned a lot from, but also resisted opening up as well. So there was a bit of a conflict there because I wasn't used to it.
Yeah. Anyway, we think she's a good egg. Plaiting hair.
Twisting dreadlocks.
Yeah. See, I don't even know the language.
Now you go to the hairdressers and get your locks twisted.
But you couldn't then?
I don't think so, no. So you used to twist it all the time.
First book.
Second book, sorry.
It's the first book I've read.
Yes, and that was the first version of it, which was a slimmer book.
Yeah. You've got to read it, honestly. OK, we're going to whiz on because I've got to get to questions in a minute. Yeah. Oh, hello.
Him.
That's Mr. David.
Yes.
Your
husband.
Current husband. There was a relationship in the middle, wasn't there?
Yes.
Well, there was quite. You had a bit of bad luck with relationships.
I think I also didn't choose well.
Yeah.
Because I kind of...
You had two good eggs, though. You had that egg and this egg.
Yes, and there were some people in between who were all right.
Yeah.
But I think I didn't... I wasn't looking for the people who were right for me, put it that way.
And I'm particularly interested in one relationship that actually crushed your creativity.
Yeah.
Don't get into those sorts of relationships, everyone. When I read that you shared the Booker Prize with Margaret, I was a bit upset because I wanted you to have it for yourself and not share it. But when I read in here how you went on stage and hugged each other and you thought of two races embracing, I let that go, that feeling of minding, and I just thought it was so beautiful what you said.
It's been entirely positive for me, and she's an incredible person. So, yeah.
You have been incredibly successful, and it's been a slog because you've had to open every door. Nobody opened a door for you. You opened the doors, and you've had to do a lot of pushing to get those doors open. And what I particularly notice after reading this book is you do something that we can call you lift as you climb. You actively help others. You forge pathways and you help others make them into whole roads. Can you talk a bit about that?
I come from a very socialist family, and both my parents were activists. My father was, he was very active he was a shop steward, he was very active in trade union, to the point that he lost his last job. 1975 was the last time he was employed.
Yeah.
He lost it because he was trying to campaign for better air conditioning in the factory, and whoever it was, the manager, was disagreeing with him, and they were having a row. My dad told him off because that's what it was like, and he lost his job. My mother was a trade unionist. She was trade union rep at the school where she taught. And so I grew up with people, and my father was a counsellor, so I grew up in an environment where people were thinking about more than themselves. And I don't want to come over as holier than thou in any way, because I'm not, because my priority is my creativity and my writing. That is my number one priority. But within that, I do have a very strong sense of community. And I know that things don't change if you take everything for yourself and you don't give back. So part of what I've been doing for a long time now is, as I said, with those initiatives, creating opportunities for other people. And I just think I would like to lead by example so that other people, and people are doing it, I think. I think there is more of an awareness, that's come about in the last few years, that people are aware that we need to look after each other and to help each other. And it's not just about your own ego and your own development. It's about your communities, especially not the Eton community, because they don't need any help, right?
They don't need any help. They seem fine.
They
need to sit down, maybe.
Yeah, or the Oxbridge community, actually.
Yeah, maybe they could sit down,
too. But all those other communities who have been, sidelined, overlooked, persecuted, those are the communities that need support. And it's important that we are part of that. I don't want to say support networks, wrong expression, but you know what I mean. We need to, just do what we can.
You've done a lot. And you're doing a lot. And I think your books, I know you've done essays and stuff, I think your books, each and every one of them, is an absolute fabulous place to go and spend time. And this one is no exception. What are the elements that lay the foundations for creativity and our careers? It's all in here. That is the question you ask at the beginning of the book, and you've put your elements in it, and you've answered a lot of those questions. And
because it's about more than just your literary influences.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's, I talk about my father speaking broken English, and how that has probably, I grew up with somebody who spoke broken English, and I didn't realise that until I played back a tape of him talking. And that has probably influenced the fact that I like to create characters who speak in the vernacular. My characters often speak in the vernacular, or I have characters who speak, and there's a cadence of some other language or culture in what they're saying. The Catholic religion, I talk about how that influenced me, and the theatre. So there are so many things that contribute and that go into our creative mix that I don't think we talk about enough.
It's a lot more than Jane Austen, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Who is actually, she was such a snob, wasn't she? God. Another thing you write about in the book, I'm going to come to questions in a minute, but I just want to touch on this thing that you say about goodies and baddies, and how that should be consigned to the simplest of fairy tales and possibly the past, because we're all a mixture of good and bad, and so to write a character as completely bad or as completely good.
So your characters need to be complicated and complex, as we are as human beings. And sometimes when I'm teaching my students, and they will say, oh yes, I'm writing this story, and this person, they're really evil, they're this, that, the other. And I say, no. You have prejudged your character. Allow your character to be who they are. They are fully rounded people, right? And if they come over as evil to the reader or particular readers, that is our relationship to the character that you've created. But don't tell us that this character is evil, because you are limiting the way in which you're creating your characters. So the idea is, with fictional characterization, is that you think about the whole picture, and you try to shine a light on different aspects of them, rather than have this simplistic notion that this individual is good and this individual is bad, because that's not really true. Even Saddam, even Hitler, right?
Yeah.
They would have had some relationships that were probably nurturing relationships. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's about the complexity of humanity. That's it.
And I think if we read your books, we can become more empathetic in general to characters that we might have had a sort of, blinkered black and white view of. So he's good, yeah?
Hope so.
Yeah, it's great. It's time to... Oh, there's so much I want to ask you, though, but maybe they'll be shy and I can. It's time to take questions. I'm going to see what online questions we've got. Oh, yes, we have. I'm going to Who wants to ask a question? Stick a hand up. And what I'm going to do is somebody over here, and while you're getting the mic, I'm going to read you an online person. Claire asks, she's an online person, if you had to play a character from one of your books, who would it be and why?
I think, well, because Amma is loosely based on my younger self in Go Woman Other, I think it would be her, because she would be the easiest character for me to play.
What would be the biggest stretch?
Hattie. Because the 94-year-old farmer. Yeah.
I think you'd do that all right. Hannah asks, your first published book was a collection of poetry. Is your grounding in poetry important to your fiction?
Yeah, so totally. Because even when I was writing theatre, I was writing verse drama, if you want to call it that. It feels quite grand to call it that, but it was poetry, even though it was theatre and very experimental. And my love of language comes through poetry. And reading poetry, but also writing poetry, which is about compression and concision and finding imaginative ways to express yourself and imagery and capturing the essence of things without having to elaborate and spell things out. And I think my writing, in some ways, my use of language, my sentences they're thought through like a poet.
I think that's maybe why when I'm reading your work, I feel it. Because you get under my skin like that, because it is so evocative of feeling.
Yeah, and I have an emotional connection to my writing as well. I'm not a cerebral writer, or only a cerebral writer. I connect emotionally to what I'm writing, and I find that very satisfying, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
So that as well, with the poetry, that then generates the way in which I write, I think.
Has the person got the microphone?
Yeah. Yes.
Good. What is your question, please?
You mentioned earlier that you like your characters to be slightly larger than life, and when they're flat on the page, it didn't work for you. And I was just really interested in that, is when that's happened to you, has that been because a character, you can't make it work and you have to kind of ditch that character? Or have you been able to liven them up and make them work for you? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, both things have happened. So I was, before I wrote Mr. Loverman, I was working on another novel, and the character, it was a 19th century African man who ends up down a tin mine in Cornwall, and he was not coming alive. I did not know how to get inside him, and I did spend probably 2.5 years on it, and I should have really given up earlier. I just could not bring him alive, and the language I was using was very poetic, and I liked the language, but actually the character was flat on the page, and he never did come alive. And in the end, I discarded that and turned it into a short story, and I had written about 40,000 words. And yeah, so I say goodbye to it. And then in Go Woman Other, the character who's not alive is Grace, and she is a woman growing up at the end of the 19th century and in the 20th century, and it was a struggle to bring her alive, and I didn't understand why I couldn't, because usually when I write characters, they just jump off the page, and she wasn't jumping off the page. And I think I saw her too much as a victim, that she was somebody growing up in the north of England, a mixed-race woman of colour, completely white environment for hundreds of miles, and she had a really tough life. And she did have a tough life. She ends up in an orphanage and so on. And I just think my attitude, my feelings towards her were too. I felt sorry for her. Therefore, she was not multidimensional. She was.
It's a bit like goodies and baddies. If you have sort of victims and persecutors, if you put them in that role, it's difficult for them to have a unique experience if they've got to branded with a brush.
Yeah, so she didn't have a sense of humour, and she didn't have a sort of, a dark side or anything. So I really had to work hard to bring her alive, and I was going to ditch her. I'm glad I didn't, because some people love her as a character, but it took a lot of work.
I've got another one online while the mic finds a new home to somebody here who wants to ask a question. An audience member asks, I forgot to say, if you're online, can you give your name and where you come from, because it helps our imagination. I found your novella, Hello, Mum. I can't do the voice, it was Hello, Mum.
Hello, Mum.
Hello, Mum. So moving and powerful. How did you find his voice?
So JJ is a 14-year-old boy growing up in a housing estate in London, and he gets into trouble. I found his voice through talking to boys who were in, I think they're called exclusion units, children who have been suspended from school and were in these special units, children who, belong to gangs. And I went and visited them and did research and talked to them, and also talked to some groups in schools of children about that age, actually not too far from here. There's a school in Islington I spoke to. So children of about the age of 14, and I just wanted to get into the mindset of a boy of that age who gets into trouble. And then I listened to some recordings on the internet of interviews as well with boys, and I also sort of Googled the slang of the time. This was published in 2010, and slang changes quite quickly. So that I could use some of the slang terms, and then having done the research, I started writing him, and he just emerged. So it did take research for that character, in a way that Mr. Loverman didn't.
Hard work, really.
It was enjoyable work.
Yeah.
But I'm so far removed from somebody of that age in his situation.
But you knew people like Mr. Loverman, so...
I didn't really. I knew them after the book was published, because they came and found me.
Because you said, how did you know?
Older gay Caribbean guys. I got to know some of them.
You were a magnet for them.
Yeah, but I didn't know older gay Caribbean men. But I knew Caribbean people.
Yeah.
And some Caribbean guys.
And some gay men.
And some gay men. Definitely older gay men.
Yeah. Have we got an audience member lined up now? Yes, hello.
As a mixed-race person whose complexion maybe makes a decision for them that betrays their the dual nationality that they have or dual ethnicity they have, did you find writing characters and allowing them to embody their heritage help you align with the feelings of both and neither of being a mixed-race person?
So when I first wrote Lara, there are two versions of the book. I expanded it 10 years later. It was an exploration of my family history and my childhood. And it went into, both sides of my family history. I fictionalized my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents and even great-great-grandparents. And also looked at the experience of growing up mixed race in London in the 60s and 70s. Very cathartic process for me, because by the end of the book, I felt that I had any sort of residual doubts I had about my identity were washed away, and I felt totally whole as a human being, integrating the heritage that I've inherited. And that was the turning point for me. And I've never looked back. So I know who I am. I know what my identity is. I don't care what anyone says. And I know what they say sometimes. So, through writing that book, it took 5 years, I worked through any issues I had around being biracial.
You surprised me when you say in the book that you've never had psychotherapy. Because, oh boy, have you worked it out.
Have I?
Oh, yeah.
It cost me nothing.
I don't think that's true.
Well, not financially,
There are other ways to pay. Because you have gone into your past and empathised with every single person in that past. Yes. So you haven't split yourself into good and bad, and the good people and the bad people. That's one of the first things a therapist has to do is to sort of like, when they demonise one parent and worship the other parent, you have to listen to that for hours before they can get a more integrated sense of we're not all good and we're not all bad. And you've done all that work.
That's so interesting, because with Lara, I write about my grandmother who objected to my mother marrying my father, and she was very, very racist. But through writing her story, imagining her story, she was dead at the point at which I wrote her, I did empathise with her. I understood where she's coming from.
You've done the work. And then, this is why this book is also so good. How to do visualizations and make them work for you. How to do affirmations and make them work for you. So, 30-year-old Bernie here is like, I have won the Booker Prize. How do I feel? That's one of your affirmations.
Yeah.
They all come true. It's magic. Anyway, learn how to do it by reading this book, getting that book. 5 minutes to go. That's not a question. That's from Ginny telling me what to do. Oh, no, 3 minutes to go now. An audience member asks, I told you to give me your name and where you came from. Anyway, anonymous audience member out there, one of the thousands, asks, do you choose the actors for your audiobooks? I can't imagine a better reader of Mr. Loverman.
Oh, he's brilliant, isn't he?
Who is that?
I can't remember. I think he's called James Good. He is brilliant. I'm sent links to various recordings of actors.
Yeah.
And then they say, which voice do you like in particular? And I can't always get the people I want.
Yeah.
And often they're quite famous actors as well. And so sometimes I might get my third or fourth choice. But so that's how it works. Yeah.
I've got a question now. In the audiobook, you had a Caribbean actor or someone that was good at Antiguan voices doing Mr. Loverman. Did you have another actor for Carmel?
I think so.
I haven't listened to the audio, I don't know. But
I can't remember, and
it's a long time ago.
I listened to a bit of them, but I don't listen to all of them.
Yeah.
So I don't. They must have done. Yeah.
Jackie in Saffron Weldon. Hello, Jackie. Thank you for your name and where you come from. Are you working on a new book now? Could you give us an idea of what or who you'll be writing about?
Yeah, I actually had a book published last week.
Oh, good heavens.
Which it's a Tate Britain book. So it's like an art book.
Oh, right.
With photographs. And they have a series called Look Again, where they've asked 12 writers who don't write about art normally to write about their rehang, which is happening in 2023. This is Tate Britain. And so they got 4 writers for the first set of books to write about feminism, gender, class, and empire. And I chose feminism to write about. So I've written this book which is looking at the representation of British women of colour in the rehang, but also women of colour in the rehang, but also British women of colour artists who I've known and followed since the 80s. It's very short, but they call it a book, so I'll go with it. And that was actually published last week. And then I don't know, I'm not working on anything else at the moment.
She's busy chatting to us about what she's done already. We'll just take one more from the audience.
Hi. I was just wondering, because in Girl, Woman, Other, one of my favourite parts of the book is the setting of London, and I'm from London, and it's something that I found I could really relate to when I was reading, and I was just wondering what the importance of place and setting is in your novel, and how important is London to you as a setting?
It's very hard for me to, to avoid writing about London, because I love the city. I've lived here all my life. There's so much going on today. London is made up of all these villages, all these communities, but its history is very deep. Its recorded history is tens of thousands of years, actually, but, certainly, we have 2,000 years when the Romans were here. It's a really rich resource for a writer. But I do try to leave it with my books, and also reinvent it. With The Emperor's Babe, I create a sort of alternate universe of London, and the same with Blonde Roots. You know, very, very different books, but the London that I write about is an imagined, our imagined universes. And with Go Woman Other, I do leave London. You know, I do go to the north of England.
You do?
And I was like, I have to go, I have to leave London. You know, it's a bit of a wrench. But it is, in a sense, my muse. I just find it endlessly fascinating and exciting. And I love that it's come back to life again, because it was just so traumatic when London stopped. And, you know, I went into the West End, because I wasn't really going into London at all. And then I went into the West End during lockdown at Oxford Circus, and it was just like, oh, my God. Mm. It was like some kind of dystopian movie.
Yeah.
Nobody was there. Everything was shut, you know. And now it's come back to life, and it's just wonderful.
Sadly, we have run out of time. Can we all give Bernardine Evaristo a huge round of applause, please? And Bernardine will be signing books in the foyer after this. I don't know how anyone can manage to get through life without this book. It will teach you how to write your own manifesto for yourself. It will give you the courage to do it. It's a fantastic book, and I mean that. It's really a beautiful book. And thank you very much for coming out. Hey, and thanks very much for you, over 1,000 people, joining us online. We felt you with us. Thank you for coming. It was lovely. And thank you for all the questions. And I'm sorry I couldn't even get to a quarter of them. And, oh, we've done the clapping already. You can do it again. And then we can go. Thank you very much.